rest in his love. I will trust the Lord, oh my soul.
Yeah, thank you guys for the warm welcome. And yes, it's been kind of weird. I feel like my wife and I have had to kind of go in and out lately, doing a lot of work for the ministry out in Zambia, Africa, preparing the way for things that are coming in our lives with that. So it has been a little bit difficult to stay connected. And so it's always a blessing to be able to be here with you and be able to just kind of walk out our faith together, right? And so today, you know, I get to share a little bit. And when Casey asked me to share a few months back, I was like, all right, so where are we in the grand scheme of the series? Obviously, we're working knowing God through the Old Testament, and I think we landed. He was like, let's flip a coin. No, I think he just landed on, hey, why don't you do Micah? And I was like, wow, that's interesting and coincidental, that I would be able to, in essence, speak after my namesake and learn and study even deeper my namesake. Because obviously, I'm sure some of you in the room, if you've been named after a book of the Bible or a character in the Bible, you're like, wow, I want to learn more about who that person was. And that's no different with me, but I will tell you that early on, it wasn't really all that exciting for me. I mean, I don't know, if you read a little bit of the beginning of Micah, it starts with, woe to all. And so it's like, ugh. I wasn't excited about it to begin with, but you know what's interesting is I grew up in South San Diego, a large Hispanic population, and when they saw my name, they didn't know how to say it, and they would always say Micah, 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 and I'd have to express to them, no, it's Micah, and they would always say, oh, like Jamaica, and I go, yeah, kinda, and but it was always interesting because you have a unique name. I was always that kid that would go to the little carousel and you try to find your name on a keychain, you never found it, back in the day. It was just like, no, your name was just not, when I was growing up, Micah wasn't a popular name, and so I was always kind of like, oh man, this is interesting. But and it's funny because my dad's in the house in the back. Love you, Dad. And give some applause to my dad because he birthed a legend. All right. So, but my dad, I think, is the one that really was firmly like, hey, I'd love to name my son Micah. And it was important because some of you have heard the story before, but I almost my mom, my mom's Filipino, and there was a situation where she wanted to honor one of her uncles who had fell to his death from a coconut tree, climbing a coconut tree, and he fell down. And she wanted to name him after him in honor of my uncle. And my dad, I think, was embracing the idea potentially, and he goes, well, what is that name? And she said, it's Ed Alfonso. And listen, that's a beautiful name. I'm not going to, say anything about that name. But it might have been even tougher than Micah for me growing up in South San Diego. Unless I got that, nicknamed the Fonz. I would have been cool with that. And it's funny, you hear all these laughs right now because, sorry guys, this works with this audience, Happy Days and that whole thing. When I try to do that with youth, they're like, what the heck's the Fonz? It's like, and I'm like, oh, all right. So thank you for that laughter on that. But, when you look through Micah, it's interesting because, right, like I said earlier, it starts with this impending doom. It's very poetic in its delivery, but it's this impending doom of what's going to happen. And for me, I'm more of a hope guy myself, and so it's kind of like hard to kind of consume that to begin with. But as I dug deeper and studied a little bit more, you start to recognize the rhythm of the book of Micah and how God works in and through him to share, basically, yes, there is some stuff coming, but at the same time, there's also a rhythm of hope that follows that. And as I was studying through that, it really made me press into this question that I think it's a question that's central to our faith. It's a question that I think maybe all of us have to have wrestled with, or at least maybe as we became, believers and really embracing the truth, but then we have people in our lives that may not yet understand the truth and the hope that we have. This question may come up from those that don't believe. And I want us to kind of just meditate on that right now and kind of think about what that question is, and it is this: how does God deal with injustice and evil and still be full of mercy? Because let's be honest, if he's truly just, then he has to confront sin. And if he's truly merciful, then he also must forgive. So which is it, right? I mean, for many of you in the room, you already know the answer, but it's still a hard question to wrestle with when you're trying to express it to maybe somebody who doesn't understand that. Maybe somebody who's in this world that looks around and says, man, who's a God like that who's going to do that and allow these kind of sufferings and evil to occur? How do we handle it? Does God punish wrongdoing, or does he pardon his people? And that's the question. We know in this world we barely or rarely get both in the same fell swoop. It's tough. We always want justice, right? When we're trespassed against. We always are. When we're wronged, it's like, hey, justice needs to be served in this situation. But we're always hoping for mercy, right? I would think, when we're the ones at fault. Because we don't want to necessarily see the same justice, placed on us, because it might not be a good ending. But God doesn't operate like we do, so that's what's cool about that. And what we find out in this tension between justice and mercy is interwoven throughout Micah, and we encounter it a lot throughout the message. So I want to kind of walk through Micah to kind of answer that question. You with me? Yeah. All right, so as we step into the world of Micah, we got to understand where he's coming from, what's going on at that time. And it's 8th century BC. The kingdom has already been split into north and south, with Israel up north and Judah down south. And he's from Moresheth, which is in the south, and that's where he primarily operates out of, sharing, prophesying to Judah. But a lot of time, even though it's mostly to Judah, does involve both the north as well. And it's an important time because in 8th century, something real serious is about to happen. The Assyrian Empire is rising. It's rising up. And soon enough, we know that the northern kingdom is nearing collapse. As a matter of fact, Micah has to experience it within his own time. Something he was prophesying, he would have to experience. Oh man, that's a rough feeling too. Knowing, and he struggled with it. He expresses it throughout the book that he is struggling with the idea of what's to come and saddened by it, in essence. And all the while we know something might be happening with Israel, Judah is watching in the south, but not learning from what's happening. And that's a dangerous place to be. Micah is a contemporary to Isaiah. Isaiah is also in the south, but where Isaiah was prophesying to the royal courts, Micah had a great perspective of being able to prophesy in the countryside with the people. He's seeing firsthand what's happening, the injustice, the evil, the things that are occurring at that time. And so he's able to even speak upon it with that kind of authority as well. Firsthand witness to it. Now, it's really important to understand that I think we know there have been times in history in the Bible where God's people have abandoned him, right? They have left and decided to walk away, to do things that would lead to this type of rebellion, a standardized, I won't say standardized, but you know what I mean? Like where you've left God, you've allowed God to be absent in your life, you decided not to process or do the things that God would have you do. This rebellion during this time, 8th century BC, that's not what's going on. The rulers, the priests, the prophets of this time actually are operating and doing the same things they've always done. They haven't abandoned God in any sense of the term. They're still worshiping. They're still sacrificing. They're still showing up. But the problem is that their lives are now marked with a bunch of injustice, corruption, exploitation. And what's happening is in essence, they think they're doing everything right, and that their religion really just has become an external practice and not transformational on the inside. It reminds me of when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees in Matthew 25, and he's talking about that cup, and he's like, you guys have the cup on the outside clean, but the inside of your cup's never been clean. And so the idea is, this is what's happening to Israel, Judah at this time. Very similar. The rulers are operating in a way that is full of injustice, full of evil, but they don't know how to address it because they think everything is legit. And it's not. It's not transformational. Their life is not transformational. So God, through Micah, brings those charges against his people. And it says in Micah 2:1 and 2, "Woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it." Skipping ahead a little bit, "They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them away. They oppress a man and his house, a man and his inheritance." Also, in Micah 3:11, it says, "Her leaders judge for a bribe. Her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, 'Is not the Lord among us?' No disaster will come upon us." Premeditated evil, corruption, exploitation. The leaders have become self-serving at this time. They run the land with bribes. They're treating the vulnerable and the oppressed poorly. They're stealing their land from them for their own purposes. And with it, these people, the vulnerable, are not only losing their land, but they're losing their security. They're losing, eventually, their hope. And this is the tough part, because this is something that they should know, because it's a violation of the Torah, what they're doing. You're not supposed to sell off lands, ancestral lands that have been given to families, and this is what they're doing. There are some practices where land could be sold off because of the debt that they've held, but in the year of Jubilee, it's given back to the family. It's like wiping clean the debt. But this wasn't happening. They were just taking the land, and they were taking it for their purposes, for the things that they wanted to do, for the people in their sphere of influence, and forgetting the vulnerable, the ones that were suffering the most. What's crazy too, and this is the part in Micah 3:11, the most dangerous part of this, and this is really a cautionary warning to us as well as we walk through our own stretch of faith, our own walk of faith, this idea that they had, which is, again, they don't think they're doing anything wrong. As it said in Micah 3:11, "Is not the Lord among us?" So they're, in their mind, they're thinking, hey, yeah, we're doing all the things. We're worshiping, we're sacrificing, we're doing all the rituals, we're doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. Isn't the Lord with us? But the fact is, nothing has changed inside. And therefore, their integrity or lack thereof, the way they operate, is unjust and evil. So much so that it's like because they believe they're still doing the right thing, that it's like a reversed and perverse morality. So much so that Micah in 3:2 says, "You who hate good and love evil." You probably don't have that one, my love, who's up there, yeah. But it's a cautionary warning to us that we might get into the throes of like, hey, I think I'm doing the right things. I think I'm handling this walk of faith correctly. But maybe, just maybe, could we examine the inside to make sure that we're doing those things as God would have us do? Have we been shaped by the worldly challenges, or maybe the worldly rhythms or the worldly routines that have become part of our life, And we've just imagined that they are in alignment with the way we are supposed to go. Have they influenced and shaped us in a way that we think they're just a part of the practice of our faith? We must be careful. It's a warning in many ways. Is not God with us? They're so far gone that they don't even understand what they're doing. So, God has to respond to that. This is important. A just God has to respond to that. And he does. In Micah 1:6 says this, "Therefore, I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations." It's a prophecy that the northern kingdom is going to fall. The Assyrian Empire is going to come and rise. Homes are going to be lost. Families are going to be scattered. Identity is going to be shaken. Those things are going to happen. And I think it's important too, because sometimes we think of some prophecies as symbolic. This is what might happen, or it's in symbolism. This is what could happen, but this is historical reality, guys. Micah was prophesying what was going to happen because God had shared it with him to let them know. And we know this because in the Syrian Empire actually overcomes the northern kingdom in 722 BC. And it becomes the beginning, in essence, of this fall, this judgment that was put upon them. And why did this have to happen? Because their evil doing, their injustice, their actions have become systemic. It's not like this one-off thing here and there. It became the rhythm and practice of how they did life, how they practiced their faith. And so God needed to act. It says in Micah 1:7, all her idols will be broken to pieces. Everything that they were trying to trust in apart from God would be taken away, would be fallen, would be pulled away. And that verse right there really got me thinking, and maybe you guys have been there too. There's been times in my life, I know, that where I feel like I'm in this good rhythm and all of a sudden things are just starting to strip away from me. And I'm like, whoa, wait, what? What? God, what's going on? And it's hard to wrestle with that because you're kind of like, this seems right, this seems fine, what's wrong with this and whatnot, but when you're in the middle of it and you can't see what might be going on and it happens, you struggle with it. And we have to reset. We have to be able to step back and go, whoa, and take it to the Lord and figure out where maybe in the inside we're not transformed yet in that practice. I'm sure we've all kind of felt that at some point in our life where things that we don't think are problematic or an issue that are good get stripped away, and it's hard to process in the moment. Why? Why, God? Why this? Because remember, at one point, this kingdom was rocking and rolling. Rocking and rolling. I think only about 250 years before that, we're talking about Solomon, the golden era. So now they're experiencing the collapse of the good things that they knew. And some of it they can't even question because they're like, is God not with us? And sometimes it feels like that personally. Is God not with me if these things are happening? At least that's the way I feel sometimes. And it doesn't stop there in the northern kingdom. It's interesting because Micah also expresses later that Judah, you're up next. It says in Micah 1:9, her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself. You see, the consequences of sin do not stay contained. They spread. And that's the dangerous part, right? You think you're like, I'm doing this thing and it's it's not consistent, or it's not a practice. This one thing happened. But next thing you know, you're continuously finding yourself in those same dangerous rhythms until you get to a point where it's systemic in your life. And that's the scary part. Is one day you're thinking, it's just one, I nodded off once on this, but instead now it's become systemic. And this is what's happening to Judah. They're seeing what's happening up north, but they're not learning from it. And so they're just, okay. And well, God says, hey, it's coming, because it's spread. And now the southern kingdom, the place of the temple, the center of worship, it's in danger too. Micah delivers one of the most shocking statements in the entire book in 3:12, where he says, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The temple will hit a mound, the temple hill, a mound overgrown with thickets. Sorry, I am losing my eyesight for sure. And the weird part is I have glasses in my pocket, but I'm not gonna put them on. That's the real tough part. Jerusalem, the city of God. This place where the sacrifices were made, where people would worship, they gathered together, beautiful things have happened, all reduced to ruins. This temple where God's presence was honored, it's gonna be overtaken. Why? Because they honored God with their lips, but they rejected him with their lives. And they can't see that because they think they're doing all the things, they're doing all the right things. And I'm not gonna sanitize it, because this judgment that's happening that Micah's sharing from God is, you're gonna see a foreign invasion, you're gonna have a loss of security, you're going to experience economic collapse, you're going to be exiled from your land, and that actually is expressed later on in Micah 4, where you are going to Babylon. So after the Assyrian Empire takes over the north, eventually they're going to be in a Babylonian exile, as we know. Tough times ahead. Gosh, just 250 years ago, we were in the golden era of Solomon. Here we are. They will remove everything that's familiar, everything comfortable, everything that I thought was secure. 250. It's hard to fathom sometimes that they had this golden kingdom, the era of beautiful wisdom, completely toppled only 250 years later. And when I was doing my study, I was like thinking, man, thank God I'm a part of a nation that doesn't have that. This 4th of July, guess what year we're celebrating? Cautionary warning that the people of God in this nation, how do we respond to that? I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea, like, we're celebrating 250 here, everything's great, when we know it's not. But how do we respond, the people of God? 250 years. That's all it took. Why such severe consequences, though? What's the point in that? Because God is not indifferent to evil. If he ignored all the corruption, the exploitation, the injustice, then he wouldn't be just, right? And that's his character. He's a just God. And if he allowed all those teachers to continue oppressing the vulnerable, then he wouldn't be good, which is also a character of God. God must deal with evil. He has to. But if that's the case, this is where we feel the tension, right? If God judges sin like that, by taking the kingdom and reducing it to rubble, to where all it has left is overgrown thickets, then you've got to be kind of concerned about our own lives, right? Even in this time, we got to be kind of concerned about our own lives, because, again, we ain't innocent. And if that's the case, and this is a God who deals with evil, then we have to know, how can God confront that evil without destroying his people? How can he be just and still show mercy? That's that tight question. That's the question that I feel like sometimes the people in my life that are not believers, they want me to answer. Doesn't make sense to them. And it's a fair question. It's a fair question, because if God has a character of being just and merciful all at once, how can somebody who doesn't understand the end, how he handles that, just alone, would not be able to see those two things reconcile one another? Just wouldn't happen. And so the idea is, I felt strongly as going through this, is like, man, this is a serious situation that it is so imperative that we continue to engage the people who do not know the hope that we have with this knowledge and this idea of who God is, which we're getting to, because the hope is next, right? Because otherwise they're left with the first part. They're left with the part that says, man, well, he deals with sin. He's a just God, that's for sure, but that's a scary place to be. Scary place to be. So how does he do it? Through covenant hope. Covenant hope. In the middle of this judgment in Micah, hope begins to rise. It's written, like I told you earlier, it's like written in this back and forth kind of like, woe to you, woe there. But this is happening and this is coming. And I really, what a roller coaster of emotion when you get through that, because you're excited when the hope comes, but then it comes back to this, well, but you're doing this, and this is gonna happen after that, whoa, and then so this back and forth pronouncing of judgment, expressing hope, but this hope is based on a covenant that God made with Abraham generations before. Through Micah, God addresses the very areas that were impacted in Micah. This is what I love. There's something about Micah that's very poetic, the book. It's very poetic in how it's written, and there's these, again, God is just so good in how he handles and addresses evil and almost flips it on its head how he addresses it. For example, we're talking about war. There was an impending judgment, and war was going to happen, and the empire, Assyrian Empire, is going to take over the northern kingdom. That's a scary thought. War leads to death. There's lots of things that happen with war. We know that. But the beauty in Micah is, in Micah 4, I love this. I love the way this is written. It says that he beats their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Now, to picture that a little bit, you have a sword that's used in war, but there's going to be a moment where God changes and transforms that instrument from something that is a killer into an instrument, a plowshare, which is what digs up the ground, to something that cultivates life. This beautiful picture of a sword that gets, reworked, refined into a different type of instrument. And that's who God is in that little picture alone, in that passage. Swords into plowshares. It's such a beautiful picture, and I don't know where it is on the East Coast. I'm trying to remember. But there's a gift, a statue of a man who's doing that. And I'll have to find it, but it's this beautiful statue that kind of communicates that hopefully there's a future peace that will take over, and war will not be the thing that is the result. It's not the end. That's the important part. He does that. So takes away war that's going to happen as part of their judgment in the future, and replaces it with cultivating life and turning the tools of death or instruments of death into instruments of life. He's also going to replace those corrupt rulers that we just talked about. And he's going to replace them with the bringer of peace, a shepherd who will shepherd the remnant of his people. And that person's going to be born out of Bethlehem. And so this is obviously a very familiar passage for many people in Micah. And he prophesies the birthplace of Jesus. And that person will be the shepherd who shepherds the remnant of the people. And then, of course, the book ends with this reflection of God's character and a reminder of his promises to Abraham. And it's in Micah 7, verses 18 through 20. And it says this: "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all of our iniquities into the depths of the sea. You will be faithful to Jacob and show love to Abraham, as you pledged on oath to our ancestors in days long ago." It's because of God's character. He is loving and faithful. That is our hope. That he sees what is important. He has to deal with injustice. He has to deal with evil. But what's more powerful than his dealings with evil is his covenant love for his people. And so that's why it comes back in Micah. It comes back from that situation. So much so that he says that he will show mercy, that any of our transgressions will come under his foot, and then he'll hurl them into the depths of the sea. That's a beautiful feeling, especially hearing the impending doom, knowing that what we have access to is something far greater. And what's really beautiful about this for me is he's steadfast. God is steadfast and faithful, right? That covenant was made over 1,200 years before this situation. And he's still the same yesterday, today, and forever. Yes, we've made some mistakes. Yes, we've done some tough things. We've struggled in injustice, and evil does need to be addressed. But his covenant love will see through that there will be a future peace without a war. That there will be a shepherd that will shepherd the remnant of his people. And it says, who is a God like him? Who is a God like him? So how do we respond? How do we not become those rulers, those priests, those prophets that were doing much of what they were doing to the oppression of the vulnerable and for money? Well, the beautiful thing is, again, Micah, through God, expresses exactly what we have to do. Micah 6:8, very popular passage, many people know. It says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." People are very familiar with that passage. If you're not, then I'll say this. God is expressly saying, this is what I require of you. Do these things. And when you get those kind of those imperatives, it's like, all right, that should be easy enough. And yet we struggle with it all the time. But maybe we can read, I'm going to unpack it quickly because we're out of time here. But act justly. This is about living with integrity. Okay? You can't bend, you can't break, you can't move around because of circumstances. If you're steadfast in what you believe, then you're steadfast in what you believe regardless of the circumstances. And you have to walk through that, stand firm in that. A big part of acting justly is defending the vulnerable. And this is hard for some people, right? Because we've grown up in a society where they tell us, hey, you got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But God is obviously expressing that there are the least of these that need care because they are in a spiritual bondage that almost doesn't allow them to get to that bootstrap pulling up of their own. And he's calling upon his people to be the ones that defend that. Defending the vulnerable. What does that look like? It might look different to each and every one of us. For my wife and I, as Casey shared, we see those orphans in Zambia as a very vulnerable situation. If they were not rescued, then they would be living a life on the streets and probably convicted to whatever the rules of that street society is. And it's not good, I'll tell you folks. It's not good. They'll probably think that to survive, they need to be, that the young ladies need to be trafficked by the boys just to save the life, the street life there. Now, again, if I try to apply the practice of, well, they got to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, it wouldn't make sense. So there's a wrestle there sometimes, because I know that we also want to see people have accountability. So not dismissing that. There's a level of accountability that we have to consider with people. But there are also situations where there are the least of these. And how do we come alongside and defend those that are in that vulnerable state? We have to love mercy, and let's be honest, this is one that gets a little hard sometimes. And when I say that, I mean, again, going back to the idea of if there's a trespass, there needs to be a justice associated with that. But maybe what we have to do, folks, is let that be God's job, because that's what it says. Let God handle that, because the imperative we have is not to go and do that, but instead to love mercy. Not just tolerate it, love it. Love it. When there's situations that are occurring, to love a merciful approach, a compassionate approach to those trespasses. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes because inside of us we're like, no, but that's a trespass that needs to be, there's a justice that needs to take place against that trespass. Yeah, God will handle that. He's asking us to demonstrate the compassion in his heart, his character. And why? Because maybe, just maybe, I'm throwing it out there, maybe, just maybe, he might let us play a part in the spiritual breakthrough that might occur in that person as a result of receiving a compassion when they know that they've been, in essence, guilty of whatever issue what evil they've expressed. Could it be possible that we need to love mercy in those situations because God might be using us as an instrument in that moment? Hard one, though. Hard one. And of course, the last one, which I know very well, is walking humbly. You all know that. We got to depend on God daily. Daily. We got to reject pride. We got to stay teachable every way. Paul tells us that we got to be careful because knowledge, and as we grow in life, we get more knowledge, but as knowledge comes, it puffs us up. And with that can come other things like pride, conceit, things like that. He says knowledge puffs us up, but love will build us up. So we got to focus on how we can love in those situations, and we need to be humble as we approach, because if we let the knowledge and pride puff up in us, then we're going to be operating outside of the imperative that he's given us. This is the antidote to corrupted religion. Not more rituals, but a transformed life, if we walk in that. So I'm going to go back real quickly and end in this. Back to the original question posed at the beginning. So how does God deal with injustice and evil while still being full of mercy? And to understand that that obviously is the work of Jesus Christ on the cross, but I want to kind of give this beautiful illustration, a story that's shared sometimes to kind of even show even more clearly the expression of Christ on the cross in this depicted story. So I want to share it. Once in a distant land, there ruled a famous king he was famous for being perfectly just and incredibly loving. His kingdom was peaceful until a series of thefts at his treasury occurred. To stop the crime, the king issued a decree. Whoever is found stealing from the treasury will receive 10 lashes in front of the entire kingdom. Despite the warning, the thefts continued. The king, determined to uphold the law, raised the penalty to 20 lashes, and then to 30 lashes. And eventually, because the thefts keep coming, to 40 lashes. And if anyone knows what 40 lashes mean, it's basically death. You can't overcome 40 lashes. So death was the punishment for this person. Eventually, the guards caught the thief red-handed. And to the shock of the entire kingdom, it was the king's own beloved daughter. And of course, the kingdom fell in a tense silence. The people wondered, well, if he pardons her, he would be a loving father for sure, but he would be a failed king who didn't follow his own law, not just. But if he punished her, he'd be a just king, but would lose the daughter that he loved most. On the day of reckoning, the princess was tied to the executioner's table. And as the executioner raised the whip to deliver the first strike, the king stood and shouted, "Stop." He walked down from his throne, removed his royal robes, and laid his own body over his daughter, wrapped his arms around her to shield her entirely. And then he looked at the executioner and he said, "Proceed." The executioner, of course, hesitated, saying, "My king, I cannot strike her without striking you." But the king insisted. All 40 lashes fell upon the back of the king until he died, paying the full penalty of the decree for a crime that he did not commit, but for a daughter that he loved oh so dearly. Of course, the king represents our God, Father in heaven, with that covenant love. The daughter represents us, humanity, struggling in our sin, evil doing, all the things we continuously do. The punishment that occurred represents the debt of sin. That's what has to happen. Sin occurs. This has to happen. He's not indifferent to it. But he makes a sacrifice unlike any other God. He makes a sacrifice. And that sacrifice was giving up his own son, Jesus Christ, who took all those lashes on our behalf so that we could go free. So how does God deal with injustice and evil while still being full of mercy? He didn't have to choose between them. He fulfills both by his own sacrifice through Jesus. It says in Psalm 85:10, "Mercy and truth have met together, righteousness and peace have kissed." And that's that picture. Mercy and truth have met together, righteousness and peace have kissed. Justice and mercy meet. Righteousness and peace embrace. The just king shows his love and mercy for us by taking on what we deserved. And it just got me thinking, wow, Lord. Just like Micah says at the end of chapter 7, who is a God like you? Who is a God like you that would do that for me? And it's such a beautiful saying. And I was telling Casey, I was like, man, what's that song that we sing that shares it? We sing it in this room all the time. Who is a God like you? We never found out. No, I'm kidding. We did. So Psalm 139. But it was just this beautiful feeling in that moment where I was reading it and I felt this God and his love for me, this deep, deep love for me, even though I've done some tough things, you know? And I deserve a lot worse. But he's so good. Let us remember that in our own lives today as we walk away. I want you to think about these questions too. Where am I practicing outward faith and without inward change? Outward faith without inward change. And how well am I living out Micah 6:8, acting just, loving mercy, and walking humbly? Personally. Let's remind ourselves this week that the just God of the universe is faithful to his promises, that covenant love, and that love wins in the end. Amen? All right, let us pray. Father God, who is a God like you? That you would take on our iniquities, that you would stomp on them, put them under your foot, and then hurl them into the sea, Lord. After all that we have done as a people, that you would do that. Lord, protect us and shape our hearts so that we would know that we're walking with you and in alignment with your precepts, Lord. You're so loving, you're so good, Lord, and you ask us to be like you. May you continue to instill in us your character. your love for people, your mercy and compassion. May we not be puffed up by information that comes from this world, Lord, but built up by your love and the love that we would share with others. I thank you, Lord, for all you're doing in this local family of believers, Elevation, so dear to my and my wife's heart. And we just ask that you would continue to bless us with your wonderful, wonderful, abundant life so that we could then be those disciples that share it with others and make other disciples and change this entire community, change this entire city. And for that, where sin was spreading, may your goodness spread across our city and to the outer ends of the earth. In Jesus' name, amen.
I will sing a new song. I will sing a new song. I will dance a new